Joining me now is writer and director Andrew Cividino. Hello.
Hey there.
So there's a long tradition of coming-of-age movies. Were you hoping to pay tribute to the genre, or were you aiming to, push its boundaries, do something very different with it?
I think in a way I was trying to do both. I wanted to really work within the space of the genre so that, when you're watching the film, it feels accessible, and it's also kind of giving a nod to the films that came before it, but using that structure to really push off and do something that I don't think had been done before, and use it as a vehicle, genre as a vehicle to dig into deeper truths about what I felt I knew about growing up.
Well, we're going to get into some of those deeper truths, but first I understand you kept an 11-line manifesto
I did, yes.
with you while you were filming to guide you. Tell me about that.
Yeah, when the idea was kind of brand new for me in about, I guess, 2011, it was sort of floating in the ether, and I knew how I wanted it to feel. I knew what I wanted to evoke in an audience, but I didn't have a story yet. I knew the setting, but so I wrote down these kind of 11 lines on a piece of paper, and they ended up being my sort of guiding post every time I had a question for myself, whether I was still making the movie I knew I wanted to make, whether it was in pre-production or we were on set and it was a tough day, or we're in the edit. I could always go back and look at those and say, am I being honest to the idea that I wanted to make?
Can you give us an example of one of those lines?
Yeah, I can pull it up.
Nice.
They were kind of random. It was like, I want to make a film that makes people feel what it is to be caught up in the Lord of the Flies stage of male adolescence, a search for a place and identity in the chaos of youth. Or I want the film to be representational, but with no fear to flourish, stylize, interfere, pause for a laugh, or exaggerate. It has to be as honest as a doc, but it can't be afraid to lie to get at truths or for a good kick. Things like that.
Keep those around with you?
Yeah.
No, those are ambitious aspirations. And you're young, you're in your early 30s. How confident were you that you could make a film that lived up to your manifesto?
Well, I mean, I was confident that the idea was right and that it was strong, and so the doubt comes in when you're like, will I achieve this idea? Can I succeed and not fail the idea I have for this film? But the idea itself, I was always confident in.
And you grew up in Dundas, Ontario, but you spent your summers in Thunder Bay, where the
Yes.
film is set. How much of the film is based on your experiences?
I think it's not quite a 50-50 split. It's more my personal experience than not, or of those people that I know. So I grew up going up, spending my summers there, and definitely all of the sort of the ruckus that the kids get up to throughout the film, it didn't require a lot of imagination in writing. That was definitely based on my own experience, along with a lot of the sort of relationship dynamics and between the families. But a lot of it also came from my actors. I had this incredible cast of young actors to work with, and we'd made a short film the year before we shot the feature. So spending a summer with them and really getting to know them, that really influenced me going back to the script over the following year and really building those characters out from, and I think that's when they emerged from being the sort of stock characters that you would expect to having a lot more of an inner life.
One of the lines you read from your manifesto was about a particular stage in young adulthood. What interested you about that particular stage?
I think, there was something particularly about male adolescence that really sort of shone through up there. There's the bravado, and there are these destructive impulses and kind of coming online sexually, and it's a very complex time, but it's often painted with a very simple brush. I think because it's so brash and loud, it's easy just to look at it as like, oh, well, this is like boys being boys, and I wanted to dig underneath that and look at how complex the relationships are, the vulnerability that's there, and how for some young people you're kind of at this precipice of making a decision that can, they seem inconsequential at the time, but they can really affect the trajectory of your life going forward.
Well, you really capture that. It's the film evokes some nostalgia, but it's not nostalgic. You really capture the guy talk kind of bravado between boys talking about girls. Do you remember those conversations from your own life?
Yeah, and not super fondly. I think that's part of, there are scenes that are, somewhat uncomfortable to watch because of that. And I think even in the edit, we're struggling. Should we actually put this in the movie? And the litmus test was always, well, did this happen when we were kids? Did we actually talk like this? And unfortunately, the answer, was yes. And
It is difficult to listen back to as a young adult. I mean, you and I are roughly the same age, and to remember, oh, that was some of the language I used with my friends. It's easy to erase those memories.
Yeah, I think and I think that's the danger of nostalgia is when we go over and we gloss over all of those pieces and we forget to understand them, or we think it's something that it's not maybe comfortable to talk about. But I think the way that young men who kind of sit around the locker room and the way that they speak about women, it's very specific, and it's not it's not appropriate, but it is how they speak. And so I wanted to at least have that captured in there, and not to have every character feel the same way about it, but to not fail to address it. I think that wouldn't be fair.
Is that what was most important for you about capturing that language? Is just the fact of let's take a look at this, or did you want to make a specific point about the fact that this is how young men talk to each other?
I didn't want at any point to judge my characters, or to have the film necessarily do that. I thought if we could step back as an audience, and I could present it in sort of just an observational way, it would give us a chance to draw our own conclusions. But I think if we don't actually talk about it, then it's something that probably isn't ever going to really change if it's not addressed, if we just accept it as boys being boys. So I think by putting it out there and just showing it how it is, at least it opens it up to conversation.
Maybe the most fascinating thing for me about this movie is this issue of class, because you have these three boys. One is a city boy that goes up to Thunder Bay every summer, and you have two local kids, and they're all friends. That's mainly the dynamic going on in the film. And it made me think about relationships I had when I was younger, across class, where people from different family circumstances. And it was very poignant for me because I thought about how when you're young, you don't realize that your lives are going to turn out very differently.
Yeah, there's something about these characters that's exactly that. They're intersecting at this point in their lives, and at this moment, they're in the same place. But where they're coming from and where they're likely to go is actually, in many ways, likely to be different. Adam's family comes from a great deal of privilege, and he's sheltered and innocent. And Nate and Riley are cousins in a precarious situation. They have both in a familial way, they've dealt with tragedy, and in terms of the financial picture of their family. So I think there's this, as adults, they would never probably cross paths, but at this point in their lives, they do, and they develop these complex, these friendships. But it's rife with its own conflict that's going to be inevitable based on their lack of really shared experience.
Something so poignant about that for me. Were you thinking about some of these friendships you had when you were younger, when you were writing and directing this?
Yeah,
film?
absolutely. I mean, my parents really encouraged me to hang out with whoever I wanted to, and as a kid whose parents work a lot, you end up spending a lot of time around the dinner tables of other families and seeing how different families live. And I don't think at the time I was, internalizing what that necessarily meant. But upon reflection, that was something that I felt was important that I wanted to incorporate in the story.
Are you in touch with any of those old friends?
Yeah, I'm actually still really close with a lot of the people that I grew up on. We shot on Sunnyside Beach, the place that I wrote to the setting, and I'm still close with a lot of those people. So it's been really interesting to share the film with them and see how they feel about our story in a way.
What are those friendships like? Because I'd imagine they're not filmmakers; they're probably doing something else up there.
Yeah, those friendships. It's I think because for someone like me, I was kind of transported to this place that was, in my mind, it's always summer up there, and it's very much like a destination that's an escape from my life. But for other people, I mean, there are people who live there year round, and so their experiences are very different. So as we've grown up, our relationships have evolved, but we anchor to that kind of time and place. And I think because I still have, I'm still close in that community, we still are close, and we share all of those. When you share those really powerful, formative experiences, I think it's a bond that just doesn't go away.
So let's talk about these incredible actors, young actors. I was amazed to learn that you found the guys to play the two local boys through Kijiji.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, because I'd spent my time up there, I knew that there was no way I was going to cast professional actors out of 14-year-olds in Toronto. They're never going to have the craft to go and walk and talk like the boys I knew growing up. So my producer Karen Harnish and I went up on a really extensive casting trip up in Thunder Bay, and we went to every single high school and handed out flyers in the malls and did everything we could, but we just weren't finding the right people. And then in desperation, we'd put up an ad on Kijiji, and Nick Serino walked in during someone else's audition, kind of interrupted it without script pages, and just said, "I'm here for the movie." And we ended up interviewing him. That was the beginning part of our audition process, and we knew within minutes that he was absolutely what we were looking for, and that really started our casting process. We could anchor it around him.
And did Nick play Nate?
Nick played Nate, yes.
Okay, and Nate's character won Best Supporting. Sorry, Nick won Best Supporting Actor at the Canadian Screen Awards.
Yeah,
which is incredible.
Not bad for a first time out on Kijiji.
Could you tell he would be that good?
I mean, I don't think you can think in those terms and think that in that long term, but I knew that he had like a real magic to him. My philosophy for casting was really cast as close to the characters as possible. Find people who are these characters, and if they're a little bit different than you'd written, then maybe imagine what it's like with this person in that role and adapting your own idea of your character. So see how that shifts your story. And Nick was really close to Nate. We met him during the short film, so I had a whole summer to work with him too, and by then I was absolutely sure.
What do you get out of bringing non-actors and professional actors together on a set?
It's an amazing thing to bring them together. I think what you get out of non-actors is there's absolutely there's a rawness to that, and if they are able to play something that they can bring themselves to it, if they feel comfortable, and there's a authentic vulnerability that can come along with that. And I think also if you allow room for them to bring their own voices to it, there are also just lines that nobody could really write.
And there was some improvising going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we balanced having to serve the script in like a conventional narrative story, but allowing actors like Nick to really bring their own voices to it. And when you anchor that with professional actors, I think they can really help to ground a scene and make sure that the scene is still carrying the trajectory that it's supposed to, or that on take 20 that they have the craft to continue to bring that energy to a scene that helps elevate the non-actors.
Unfortunately, we have to wrap up, Andrew. But this is your first feature. People really like it, which frankly doesn't always happen for first-time Canadian filmmakers. What do people tell you that they like so much about this film?
I think the biggest response that I've had is that the world feels immersive and like they've been transported there, and that it's a really authentic look at what it was to be that age. But that it's fun too. I mean, I think that you really do get a chance to get kind of caught up in all of that ruckus and that sense of adrenaline. So I think if you're kind of a boy, it's a chance to like a man can sort of look back on what might have been that experience. And if you're a woman, I think it's a window into that world.
That's great. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.